You have to put yourself in Paul's place. And frankly, in this instance, I have no problem doing so. As a preacher, I am accustomed to all sorts of noises around me while I am preaching. I once officiated a wedding with an organ cipher playing a high G all the way through the service. I can preach over squirmy children just fine. I would rather have a child in church than bank vault silence any day. I have developed a death glare for use in weddings when some guest, usually not the family, sticks their arm up in the middle of the sanctuary and starts taking photos. Nothing says holy matrimony quite like the officiant squinting through flashbulbs. I'll leave texting in church alone, but do bear in mind your Facebook posts have timestamps on them. So yes, over the last 20 years, I have developed the ability to preach through pretty much anything. But to this day, I have never had to preach over a fortune teller. Think of it. These men are slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation. Yes, sir, you right over there in the navy blue blazer. Come here and let's see what's going on in your love life. Let me see your palm. Do you want to know what's coming? That'll be 40. These men are the slaves of the Most High God. They proclaim to you a way of salvation. Hey, you there, do you want to know what your boyfriend is up to? How much? What price can you place on your peace of mind? $32.50. These men are the slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation. Ma'am, do you want to know whether to paint the nursery pink or blue? Come over here and let me hold this pocket watch over your belly. We'll know soon enough. Do you want to know? What do you think it is? Well, you're in luck, my friend. That'll be 10. These men are the slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation. And Luke tells us that Paul became annoyed. What a peculiar detail to include in the story. It's almost a throwaway line. Luke doesn't tell us why he was annoyed. What she said was true, wasn't it? The text also doesn't tell us with whom Paul was annoyed. For a long time, I thought that Paul was annoyed with the slave girl herself, which hardly seems charitable at all. It's not as if she picked this way of life. Think this through for a second. If Paul released this woman from demon possession for no reason other than he is annoyed with her shouting, well, he's a jerk. It's a classic case of doing the right thing for the wrong reason. Now, we all know the problem of murky motives, don't we? It's not hard to imagine the circumstances in which our intent and our outcome are at odds with one another. I have, on occasion, been known to let something slide, not because I thought it was all right, but because I didn't have the energy in that particular moment to argue, only to find that the situation resolved itself. Right thing, wrong reason. I suspect one or two of you have probably succumbed to babysitting your grandchildren, not because you are happy for your child and their spouse to have a night off, but because you've realized that you need time to indoctrinate your grandchildren in particular ways, perhaps to your favorite sports teams. Right thing, wrong reason. We give our dogs dentist sticks for their breath and pretend they are treats. Right thing. I know there's actually nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Perhaps you punish yourself in the gym, going for hours on end, putting in the effort, not because you want to be healthy or because you enjoy it, but because you are concerned that your spouse will no longer find you attractive if you do not do so. That is admittedly the right thing to do for your health, but it is the wrong thing to do for your motives. Right thing, wrong reason. No, we have absolutely no idea what motivated Paul because the Bible does not tell us, but we do know what the outcome was. We know that the outcome was a good one for the girl. She is freed from her demon. Now, she's not freed in her life. Paul has only given her what little he could. The demon is gone. And perhaps that injustice is the source of Paul's annoyance. Not the poor woman herself, but the situation that has left her shilling fortunes in the marketplace in the first place. Perhaps Paul's annoyance runs a little deeper, a little bit more profound. Perhaps it is directed at the owners of this woman, the ones who treat her ailment as a commodity and cash in. No, the book of the Acts of the Apostles doesn't tell us at all what Paul's motives were, only that he was annoyed. But if his reason is because he is offended at the way she is being treated, it is the right thing for the wrong, it is the wrong thing, for the right reason. And here's why. If we're going to talk about what it means to be free, we have to acknowledge that the Bible has a spotty history on the subject. Pardon me for being a touch pedantic, but though we all know that slavery is wrong, it wasn't universally or even very frequently an accepted fact in the time of the New Testament. We know a lot of things today that Paul wouldn't have taken for granted then. Paul accepted a lot of inequality for women, for slaves, things that we wouldn't accept today. Paul didn't upset any social apple carts because he didn't want to turn people off from the gospel before he can get the words out of his mouth. So he told women to accept their place. He told slaves to obey their masters. And he did it all, we think, because he believed that Jesus would be coming back any day, maybe after lunch, to sort everything out. But friends, what Paul does for this young woman is an upsetting of the social apple cart. And the story tells us the townspeople weren't having it. They think he has done the wrong thing. And the strange thing about this text is that by Paul's own standards, he has. He lets his annoyance at the distractions he is encountering derail him from his agenda of proclaiming the gospel. And Luke doesn't tell us why he does so at this time. But he does tell us that Paul and Silas were thrown into jail over it. By Paul's own words, by his own writings, he's done the wrong thing. But the reason is profoundly right. Because what he gives the young woman is freedom. It's not her physical freedom. She's still a slave, but the demons are gone. She has a freedom that runs even deeper than her physical body. She has the freedom that matters. Now, I am acutely aware that justice delayed is justice denied, but we do know that the human spirit has more than one way to be free. And in this moment, what Paul has offered her is an ultimate freedom. A friend of mine who attends a downtown church, not unlike our own, tells the story of a man who began worshiping with his congregation. The man was experiencing homelessness, yet despite the tenuous circumstances of his life, he made a commitment regularly to attend worship with this new congregation. And because he was in the church quite a bit, he began to make friends with the other members of the church. He joined a Sunday school class. In time, with great effort on his part and some help on the part of the congregation, he began to stabilize his life. His medications were regulated. He began achieving sobriety chips. He eventually moved into his own apartment. It was, by any account, a story of redemption. But then one day, an old arrest warrant caught up with him. It was from many years before, but it was still current, and that meant he would have to stand trial. Some of his new friends said, "Oh, just don't plead guilty. Surely the judge will see how you have changed your life and be lenient with you." But this man who had found a new start in life knew that honesty was deeply important in maintaining the new life that he had established. And so he went to the court and he pled guilty, and he was sentenced, I think, to 18 months in jail. His new church family was crushed. The day came for him to surrender himself to the county jail, and his friends went with him to the jail. And as they said their good words to one another, they all pledged to visit him regularly, which they did. The tears were flowing. His fellow congregation members were just beside themselves that this man who had so turned his life around was walking into jail. But as he turned to go with the bailiff, he paused, asked the bailiff if he could have 1 minute more, and walked back over to his church and said, "Please don't cry. I am going into this jail freer than I have been in my entire life." There is more than one way to be free, isn't there? Yeah, Paul did the wrong thing, but the reason was right. And as a result, he was thrown into jail, and there he is with Silas, who is probably thinking, "This is another fine mess you've gotten me into." They've been put into the deepest cell of the jail. That's sort of like being thrown under the jail, and it's midnight, and they are singing hymns. Get this, he is locked up in the deepest cell of the jail, and Paul is freer than his own jailer. Get this, the young woman has not gained her physical freedom, but with the casting out of the demon, she has gained the freedom that matters. And just as God's justice is always working itself out, sometime around midnight, the ground pitches back and forth and up and down, and the chains drop off and the prison doors fly open. It's one of those moments of divine reversal that we see so often in the Bible. It's like a line ripped straight out of Mary's Magnificat, where at the beginning of Luke she tells that great and wonderful things are going to happen to those who are being stomped down. And when the day that comes that happens, you don't want to be the one who was doing the stomping. The jail doors are flung wide open, and the prisoners are free to go. But they stay. They stay, and am I the only one that thinks that's a bad idea? In the book of Acts, we know what happens to people who are imprisoned for the sake of the gospel, and it is not a motivation to stay in jail. In fact, if you and I ever wind up in jail for something we've done on behalf of the gospel, let's agree to two things ahead of time. Number one, that when one of us is ready to go to sleep, we will stop with the hymn singing. And number two, if those jail doors fly open, we run hell for leather out of them. Because only a fool would stay in jail when the door is wide open. But that's what Paul does, and Silas with him. Paul's a fool. You know, he says that about himself on occasion, that he's a fool for Christ. I guess that's about the only thing that would make you stay in jail when the doors have been flung wide open. There he is doing the wrong thing again for the right reason. The text tells us that the jailer is baptized, he and his whole family. Tell me what I must do to be saved, he asks. Now, he probably knows what is coming next. There was only one punishment for those who let prisoners go free in the Roman Empire. It is the one that he anticipated when he drew his own sword to end his own life. But I wonder here, as he contemplates his end, I wonder if maybe he was freer than he'd ever been in his whole life. Well, maybe you would choose to stay in the jail once the doors fling open, but really, no one goes to jail on purpose, do they? Maybe you've heard about Judge Lou Oliveira in Raleigh, North Carolina. He ordered Joseph Serna, a former Special Forces soldier, to jail for violating his probation. Serna did 3 combat tours in Afghanistan and came home suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which is why he turned to alcohol, which is what led to a DWI charge, which is why he was in Oliveira's court in the first place. He had been admitted to a treatment program, and Serna admitted in court that he had lied under oath about the results of a urinalysis test. He said, every 2 weeks we go to Veterans Court, and my urinalysis test had come back positive, but I denied it at first. Honesty. It's so foundational to our freedom. But then he told the truth. And the judge, a veteran of the Gulf War, did what the law required. He ordered Serna to spend 24 hours in jail. But when the time came for the soldier to go to jail, the judge drove to his house and picked him up and drove him to the jail himself. And then the judge spent the night in the jail with him. Doesn't that sound like a story straight out of the gospel? There are so many ways to be free, and they come by living with integrity with the calling that God has placed on our life in each particular moment. What peculiar stories we read today about earthquakes and demon possessions and an annoyed man doing things in haste. What are we to make of it all? Well, maybe nothing. But that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Or maybe, just maybe, if we keep following Jesus, listening to our lives, looking for that place that God is calling us to go on behalf of the gospel, maybe we too will have the opportunity to do the wrong thing for the right reason. And when that happens, what are you going to do?